welcome to the Virtual Velo Podcast powered by the Zimmunique. We are exercise and nutrition scientists, physical therapists, and performance coaches. Most of all, we're passionate about cycling and immersed in the virtual cycling community. Our goal is to inform, inspire, and challenge you. So come take another conversational ride with us today. Today we have Ken, Joy, and Chris, the core. Nathan Guerra could not join us today, so we're going to catch up with everybody, see how everyone's been doing, and then we're going to introduce our special guest, which I'm sure you've heard of before. And let's go ahead and start with Joy. How have things been in your life? Thanksgiving is tomorrow. Are you cooking up a storm?
No, I'm going to make eggplant parmesan, and that's about it.
Is that a Florida thing?
That's what we do in Florida is we make vegetables for Thanksgiving.
Gotcha.
Nope, nothing big. Gonna hang out with my kid, probably actually go mountain biking and make eggplant parmesan.
Nice. So I think the big mountain bike park that I know of is Santos. Is that near you?
Nope, I wish it was. I love Santos. It's probably one of my favorite places. We camp there at least once a year, and it's my favorite trails, but it's 2 hours from me, so we'll just do, some trails around Jacksonville. We have a lot of smaller, which is fine for my 10-year-old. He doesn't want to do much more than that anyway.
Yeah. Santos has some pretty crazy wooden features. As a matter of fact, there is a guy who founded Ray's Indoor Bike Parks. You'll find them in some of the colder cities of the country.
Cleveland.
Yeah, Cleveland, and I want to say Milwaukee. There's one. Unfortunately, he had a really bad spinal injury a couple of years ago, so I haven't heard much more about him since then.
Have you not ever been to Santos?
No, I've never been mountain biking in Florida, or I've never ridden a bike in Florida.
You'd like Santos. Santos does have a lot of. It's got the Vortex, which the Vortex Trail is a pretty advanced double black diamond trail, and then all the wooden features in the middle, pump tracks. It's pretty intense. I don't do any of that part. I don't do any of that section. But then it's got a lot of easy trails, a lot of flowy, a lot of miles. Miles and miles of trails, which I like. I like the flowy miles of, single track.
Yeah. Most roadies do, Joy.
It's got a nice little campground, so I like to go there and camp out once a year.
Nice. And so we also have Chris. Chris, how are things?
Things are going well. I knew you were going to ask me this question. I'm like, I really don't have much going on. But once you brought up the Thanksgiving topic, I have adult kids, and my daughter is home from college, so that's always exciting. Having adult kids around the holidays adds a totally new dynamic to the family celebrations, if you know what I mean. It's a different kind of a situation, but it allows me to relive my college days, which is always fun.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Cool. Well, everything is okay with me. We had a bunch of people in the office for our quarterly all hands gathering, and I got COVID, unfortunately. So I'm just on the tail end of that and can't taste much. So Thanksgiving is just going to be, sampling the textures of a bunch of different casseroles that have been dropped off by my family and hanging out with my wife and daughter. Other than that, I hope to get out on a little bike ride today, clear the system out, get it moving again. And so I'm really, really happy today that we have a special guest. If you've ever listened to the Never Going Pro podcast, this is the co-host, Shayne Gaffney. He's with us. So this is me, him, and Chris Schwenker. We got together and we made that podcast for a number of years. Maybe we'll pick it back up again one day, but we've got him with us today. So Shayne, how are things going?
Yeah, so I think Chris Gorney is who you meant, but I would probably like Chris Schwenker better than Gorney.
Yeah.
On the podcast, if I'm honest with you.
Yeah, probably so.
Right.
That's kind of why I pivoted over here to these guys.
The Delta headphones, the constant lateness to the podcast.
Yeah.
What else is this? Yeah, always something going on in the background.
Something going on in the background. Babies, you had another baby. That was hard for us.
Shayne, there's only one thing I can say is you have to be careful for what you wish. Okay.
Well, We did the podcast with you, and it lasted what, 5 days? That was a long recording.
Yeah, that was
Maybe
nice.
6 days. No, I was kidding. That was a long one though. But
There's
yeah,
only
happy to
one
be here.
topic. Speaking about myself is my favorite topic. So
Yeah, one topic that lasted about 4 hours. So it's good.
yeah,
Very,
absolutely.
very schwenker. But yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for the invite. Hopefully we can make more of these in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we've even come in pre-production today. We've even come up with another really good idea. We're not even going to talk about it today. It's so good. We don't want to spoil the surprise. So, what's been going on with you, Shayne? Well, the audience who has listened to Never Going Pro may know that you were over at Zwift
Yep.
officially.
Yeah, so I've created probably 85% of the workout and training content on Zwift at the moment. I've done a bunch of like media and broadcast stuff for them as well. Obviously, Never Going Pro podcast, as you mentioned, and then I am also a level 1 USS cycling coach. I own a business called GC Coaching. Work with a bunch of athletes on dirt, and I've worked from World Tour pro athletes right down to somebody who is learning how to clip into pedals for the first time. So
Nice.
I love working with just a myriad of athletes. That really keeps me motivated and going. And yeah, right now at Zwift, I'm the product manager for the workouts and training experience. So a little bit of mixture of business with gaming, and then also my passion, which is obviously training and helping athletes improve.
Nice. So, in comparison to running GC coaching, which you're doing one-off training programs, I'm sure there's a lot of commonality to a lot of those training programs. Going over into the world of tech and having to mesh with gamers and product and business, like what has that been like?
Honestly, not terrible. I was a huge gamer growing up, especially like really hardcore RPGs or first person shooters. Those are kind of my top 2 favorites. So I spent a lot of time just playing video games when I was a kid. Obviously, the training and those kinds of knowledge and that aspect of things I had no problem with. Uh, Business, I basically was baptized by fire when I
Mm,
decided to go full time as a cycling coach and grow my business to the point where I could support my family with it. That was terrifying, but I definitely learned a lot about products, about marketing, about business, all those things without any
sure.
real degree. And then product itself, I've done a recent certification through product school to be a senior product manager. So that was really good just to get some structure and some frameworks around what is a good PM, how do you actually lead a team, all those kinds of things where I had some experience with, but not a ton. So it honestly wasn't a terrible transition. And it was an interesting conglomerate of all the stuff I've done in my career previous to this.
Very
So it
cool.
was kind of a nice transition.
Very cool. Well, we're really excited to have you on today. And the title of today's podcast is Death of the Off Season with Shayne Gaffney. And the reason for this title is uh, there's not really an off season for virtual cyclists who can ride year round, or those cyclists that mix it up like myself that have many months of the year where it's great to ride outside and trying to mesh together uh, indoor and outdoor ambitions and when to um, push hard and when to ease up. So we wanted to get into some of that and see what your take is if cyclists have a new round of Zwift races that comes up every quarter.
Yeah. So I think this is a lot to unpack. So I think the first thing is the title Death of the Off Season rubs me a little bit the wrong way, just because
Okay.
I think the off season is pretty important for everyone because it allows you to take a break from racing, take a break from structure, and just really enjoy and reconnect with your bike again. And I think I've seen this mistake a lot where people find Zwift or they find something that they really love to do and they do it until the cows come home and then they burn themselves out 3, 6,
Mm,
9 months later. So I think having a natural ebb and flow is really important to long-term longevity in the sport. And it really just allows the athlete to reconnect with like their why for riding their bike. Like most athletes don't, I want to ride my bike because I want to do Zwift races. Most athletes, I ride my bike because I love to ride my bike and I love the wind in my face or whatever it might be. And then they find Zwift after that fact. So if you kind of forget your why and your reason for riding your bike, I've seen that end in disaster for a lot of athletes. So I think that's one of the main benefits of the off season is that. It also obviously allows for just mental recuperation because Zwift racing is fun, but it's also really hard mentally to just push yourself, hang onto the wheel, get dropped over the leg snapper for the 9th time in a row this season, right?
Are you
All those
talking
things
about
that
me?
happen to athletes, it's brutal. And I think it's good too, just for muscle recuperation. You know, you do definitely get some muscle and some tissue breakdown just from doing a lot of high intensity, repetitive movements. So having just a break from that structure, I think, is important. So long story short, I definitely don't want to kill the off season ever, but I do understand that there are different approaches to a season for an individual athlete, and there's a lot of it depends in that situation, I think, too.
So I mean, we obviously established that you feel like the off season is a good idea, and you touched on the whole mental aspect of everything, and I want to get back to that later on in the podcast because I think that's fascinating, and we've had conversations about it in the past. But so the off season is a good idea. All right, so what do you constitute as an effective off season for somebody? Like, is it 6 weeks? Like, the reason why I bring this up is because I did an article with Alex Coe, who is a colleague of yours. He trains James Joseph Barnes, who is one of the most successful esports racers. Over the last couple of years, he's got a couple up and coming athletes like Jill Power and a few others. And I did an article on him because James told me that, yeah, Alex told me to take 6 weeks off the bike, and I'm like, 6 weeks off the bike? What are you doing? It's like I sometimes feel that an off season, the longer the off season is kind of inversely proportional to how good an athlete you are. Because I would never take 6 weeks off the bike because I'm not confident enough in myself to bring myself back to where I was. Like I can barely stay away from my bike for 6 minutes because I'm afraid of that. So yeah, I'd like to get your thoughts on that. Like, what do you feel is like the ideal off season if you could tell somebody exactly? And then how would you structure that?
So I'm going to say this about 100,000 times this podcast, and I'm going to say it depends. It depends on the athlete, right? So most athletes, 2 to 4 weeks tends to be the sweet spot of an off season. And let me define off season too, because off season does not mean, okay, you're going to hang your bike up for 4 weeks and just sit on your couch and crush bonbons. Do they make bonbons still?
Oh yeah,
I hope so.
They do? Okay.
I mean they got all kinds of other good stuff now too.
Ken knows all about it.
Those.
That's right.
What I like is those Ben and Jerry's frozen cookie dough.
Oh yeah, those are
Have you
good.
had those?
Yeah,
Those are amazing.
there's these Ben and Jerry's with like a core of jam that goes right from the top all the way to the bottom. Oh man, they're
Yes.
so good.
Great tangent. So anyway, don't be just like sitting on your couch not doing anything for 4 weeks because that is 100% how you're going to lose fitness and pretty quickly. The off season should still be some semblance of exercise, but it doesn't have to be super structured. It doesn't have to be progressively getting longer endurance rides. It doesn't have to be anything you've done in the previous 9 months, 10 months, whatever it might be. So usually what I'll do with athletes is say, if you want to ride your bike, great, but put your computer in your back pocket. Don't even look at your computer. Just use it to actually upload the data post and literally just like ride your bike to enjoy riding your bike again. Reconnect with your why. I think I said that at the top of the discussion. You can also do cross training. You can go running. You can do strength work, which I think is important anyway. Yoga. You can go into whatever you want to do. Typically, I'll avoid a lot of really high intensity workouts just because I think those can sometimes be detrimental just to recuperation, especially mentally for an athlete. but 6 weeks is, I think, on the longer side. But if the athlete is burnt out, the athlete has done a ton of work, a ton of load, they've done a ton of volume, then you need that to recover from that load. And probably better than anybody, the body responds to progressive overload and impulses.
Mm.
If you're really, really burnt out and you're strained, you're not going to be able to generate nearly as strong of an impulse as you would 1 month after recovery. So if you want to generate higher stimuluses and stronger impulses, you need to be fresh mentally as also physically. And I think, I don't want to get personal, but after you did the you did that. Sorry, I didn't want to coin it incorrectly. What was the name of the ride you did cross country?
Well, I called it the Dirt Dad Fundo across
The
America,
Dirt
but
Dad
basically, I rode 4,000 miles in 2 months. I know where you're getting.
And then what did you do after that?
Oh, well,
ZRL.
no,
How
actually,
did
no,
you?
actually, I didn't. I tried to be smart. Yeah, I did. I felt that with all of that, very basic zone two, just riding to get from one place to the other, and not really concentrating on how fast or doing intervals or stimulating my aerobic system. Really, I felt like I couldn't generate any power. So I took a week to start feeling like a human again, because I very much didn't. And then after that, I hit the gym. I started focusing on building up my strength and anaerobic, like 5 seconds to 90-second power. And I did that for, I would say, about 6 weeks. And I got to tell you, the if this ZRL season has anything, is any indication, it worked out pretty well.
Yeah. So you kind of did a little bit of a transition phase / off season where you changed up the focus of what your stimulus was based on how your body was feeling and how your body was responding. And I think the other thing too is like you rode across the United States, which is obviously insane, but like the amount of emotional and also mental toll that must have had, never mind physical, I think that's something we need to all just be aware of too, where training, you might be training to improve your physical ability, but spiritually, emotionally, mentally, training can also have sometimes a negative impact on how you feel. At least for me, how I felt as an athlete. Once I was, 8 months into the season, I didn't want to do another 40-20 VO2 max set again until I recovered from it. So
Yeah.
I think that's something to consider too with the off season.
I know exactly what you're saying. When every morning I'd have to, after 6 weeks went by, I wake up in the morning and say, I got to ride my bike 120 miles again today.
Yeah.
And it's a real slap in the face, but the goods outweighed the bads. Once I got going, then it was great, and the experience was incredible. But yeah, getting over that hump was, and it was certainly something. Some of the days I'd be laying in the RV. Yes, I was in an RV for 2 months, just thinking about I have an 8 mile climb ahead of me tomorrow. You know what I mean? This is going to be brutal, but it's true. The mental aspect of sports is extremely profound.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know that we had spoken earlier. You focus on that a lot, and then one of the things that we had discussed was visualization with
Mm-hmm.
your athletes. And I know it's kind of like that. We spoke about tangent. It's a bit of a tangent, but I really feel that'd be something valuable to discuss. If you can take us through that, and even relate it to the off season. Would you be doing any visualization during the off season to make yourself better or more fresh when you come back?
Yeah, I mean, and I live in the tangents for my podcast, so any tangent I'm always going to go down and pursue. So I don't feel like
Sure.
it has to be crazy structured, because I think that makes for a good podcast too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think visualization itself is exactly what it says. You're basically visualizing how you want to perform or how you want to behave or how you want to act in some type of event. So I've used visualization before these really large presentations to media, if I'm presenting at Zwift, or before races, obviously, too, for those kinds of things. But usually I use it before a really, really important event, a really important race. And it just allows you to kind of come back to center and come back to baseline again and shut your brain off because the goal is just to perform. If we kind of boil it down, the only thing you just do in a race or an event is to perform. That's really it, right? All the other stressors, all the other, like, what if I don't eat enough? What if I have to go to the bathroom? What if I, you know, get a flat tire? All those other things you can't control. The goal is to basically remove those from the equation and remove those from your mind. So it puts me at ease and allows me to focus on just what I need to do, which is pedal my bike and perform.
So a lot of people listening probably are saying visualization. What is that? I've never done it. I'm sure that I'm sure that you've explained it to your athletes a million times. Like what is the way that you explain it to them? And are there specific like exercises that you can do to get better at visualization?
So it kind of depends on the athlete too. I think a good example would be if I work with a downhill mountain biker where they've gone through the course, they know the turns, they know where the berms are, they know where the potentials are to lose time and to gain time, and literally taking their handlebars, shutting their eyes, and then visualizing themselves going down the course and memorizing how their bars are set, when they have to lift up and down. Those are kind of the more kind of obvious ways to visualize something. But like I said, I think the underneath of all the practice is really just about mentally allowing yourself to forget about all the stuff you can't control and really just focus on what you're there to do, which is to perform to the best of your ability on that day.
That's really interesting. And I've used that technique sort of, I guess, unconsciously before. And I had my last mountain bike race of the 2022 season a few weeks ago. And I wish that I had visualized the start of the race beforehand, because I showed up. I think I was a little bit high strung. I was having a hard time focusing and concentrating. And if I had taken more time to even just look on Google Maps at a satellite view of, like, okay, I'm going to want to line up at the line on the inside, on the right hand side, and we're going to rail these turns. And this is when we bunny hop onto the grass and it could be slick and all of these things. And I didn't do any of that. When the race started, I felt a lot of hesitation and
Mm-hmm.
backed off. And I'm usually a pretty good starter, and I usually can hit the trail, first, second, third wheel, whatever. And I ended up hitting the trail sixth wheel. And I also don't think I had visualized my sensations, like my body sensations, and saying, don't freak out. It hurts. You've done the training.
Mm-hmm.
You're not hurting any more than they are.
Mm-hmm.
And so um, once we got going, I sort of visualized myself just holding pace and not panicking and enjoying myself. And I ended up gaining a couple of spots back to get a podium. But that could have been the difference between me getting third place and getting second place. I think first place was out of my reach for this one. The guy that won was like a league of his own. But yeah, I mean, I think there is a lot of value in that, in having that as sort of on the to-do list on race day.
Yeah, it's just good practice. I think if you go to like a cross race, which I love to do, like days at a cross race where you see the Cat 5, Cat 4, and look at the start line, and they're, jumping around, bopping around, looking up and down, talking to each other. They're not really, a lot of those folks aren't really like focused. And then you look at a professional UCI cross start, nobody is moving. Everybody's looking down the road and basically ready to pounce as soon as that green light starts. So the big difference between both athletes, both in a cross race, but the level of mental preparation is entirely different from a pro athlete to a Cat 4, Cat 5 athlete, in my experience. And visualization is one of those ways to kind of bridge that gap and improve the mental capacity of the athlete.
Shayne, do you work with any triathletes? And what's your thought about working on your weakness during the off season. So for like triathletes, let's say their swim is their weakness and focusing on swim technique. But even in cyclists, if they have a weakness with a 1 minute power and focusing on something like that, to where it's not about racing, but it's more about focusing on just a weakness for a length of time.
Yeah, I do work with triathletes, mostly on their bike, though, because swimming is so difficult to improve through training peaks and just like do the swim workout because I have no idea what you look like as you're swimming. So usually, if the athlete has a real weakness for swimming, I will say find a local swim coach and then take a couple classes with that swim coach so they can actually look at your form. And then, if best case is work with the swim coach, and we'll work together to create a training plan for you. Because swimming is so technique driven, and for me, that was always my weakness when I did triathlons. I always swam with like my butt way down and pretty much kicking at the
Not
bottom
enough
of the
body
lake.
fat. You need more
I was
higher
like,
body fat will help that.
terrible swimmer.
Just fat around the butt cheeks, nowhere
Yeah.
else.
But yeah, so swimming I will definitely help athletes with, but if I'll know pretty quickly like, hey, you're a really bad swimmer or you really need a lot of help here, go hire a swim coach. And then as far as weaknesses go, the off season for me isn't really about working on anything aside from enjoyment and like again finding the why and enjoying and having fun doing what you're doing. Once we get to like the base phase, if we do a traditional periodized plan, then we'll figure out, okay, what do you want to work on this year? What are your goals this year? And then here is where you are physically. Here's how much time you have to train. How are we going to go from point A to point B and get you to where you want to be for your event or for your race? And sometimes it's a hard conversation like, oh, I want to do my first Ironman, but I've only done a sprint and my Ironman is 3 months away. I've had these conversations with people like, well, you're not going to do an Ironman in 3 months. And do you have like 12 hours a week to train, right? Plus for an Ironman. Well, no, I have like 4 or 5, but I really want to do one. So sometimes it's those really hard conversations too during that phase of training have to happen. So it's a little bit of dreaming season, a little bit of goal setting, a little bit of like come to Jesus, like you're probably not ready for this, and a lot of enjoyment and having fun with what you're doing.
What the hell is going on in Ken's shed right
Dog, sorry, man. My dog keeps dropping this ball right at my feet.
Listen, mine's pacing behind me.
Yeah, and so I was like, "All right, get out of here!" Like she's just not getting my eye signals and my shoe signals.
now? And my dog is downstairs hacking up a lung. I'm like worried about him. We got dog problems here.
No, man, she's so sweet. I've got this lab that just loves swimming and loves playing fetch. So anyway, moving on. So Shayne, we have this hypothetical athlete that wants to participate in all the ZRL events. And how many times a year does this happen? Twice?
Yeah, I think it's twice.
Okay. So, right. So the format is 6 races, so 5 weeks essentially, a 3-week break, another block, a 3-week break, a third block of 6 races, so 18 races, and then some period of time off, and then the whole thing all over again. How would you approach somebody who was interested in doing something like that? So essentially you're going to have 2 long periods of a year where they need to be pretty fit. And this is sort of what I was thinking of when I came up with the name, the death of the off season.
Yeah, so I think the athlete would still have an off season transition phase. It would just
But wouldn't they have 2?
They have 2. Yeah.
Okay.
Ideally they have 2. Some folks can go through and be able to push themselves between the seasons. So it's almost like you have one really short season, you do a race season, you do like another like rebuild and then another race season. But most folks I work with need at least a week or two just to like cool the jets a little bit between those two races.
Okay.
But yeah, so I would approach it ideally. Again, it depends. Depends on the athlete. Depends on where they're coming from, how much time I have to train. In my experience, Zwift racing is really anaerobic capacity derived.
Anaerobic capacity?
Anaerobic capacity derived. That's in my experience. The folks with the largest anaerobic capacities, or FRC is what I use in WKO. The people with the largest FRCs typically perform really well because they're able to just blow the pack up in that 1 to 2 minute range. Obviously, you have to have some aerobic capacity to recover from those efforts, not totally gas yourself out. But usually it's anaerobic capacity work in that like prep season. I'll focus on that a lot for most athletes. Some athletes are naturally anaerobically strong, and I'll know that just from testing them and looking at their data. So when those folks, this kind of depends on how much time they have to train. If they're relatively time crunched, I might focus more so on sweet spot, more on tempo, that kind of higher end aerobic work. But if they have oodles of time to train, then I'll take a very traditional, like zone 2 focused approach where we'll do ideally longer weeks at a zone 2 focus to build the aerobic capacity.
When
And
you
then,
say they have a lot of time to play with, like how many hours a week are we thinking about here?
yeah, so that depends on the athlete too. A newer athlete, you know, as long as you're doing more time in zone 2 and more volume in zone 2 than you're used to, you'll see an aerobic benefit in most cases. So say you had an athlete that was 6 hours a week last year and they were pretty spent doing just zone 2, we might want to aim for 7 or 8 hours a week this year. Just a really methodical, steady increase in overall volume. I've seen a good response to that. But again, some athletes don't respond to zone 2. Some athletes respond better to sweet spot. Some athletes respond better to VO2 max work. It kind of depends on the athlete, what their best responses are. But structure would be that. And then during the race, ZRL's on Tuesdays. So most of the times, Monday would be an easy day, recovery day, good day to visualize, good day to do some yoga, just do whatever you want to do and let your body recover. Tuesday would be the race. Wednesday would be another easy day or like active recovery day when you might spin. Thursday tends to be a good day to do another block of intensity.
Mm-hmm.
And then Friday typically would be an off day before the longer rides on the weekend, which typically are more aerobic focused. So usually it's more polarized during ZRL season, where it might be 2 days a week of really, really high intensity with 3 or 4 days a week of lower and longer rides, lower intensity and longer duration rides.
So you're still shooting to have those 2 days of intensity a week, one being the race, one being intervals. And
Ideally.
sure. And so if you're looking at, like I said, a 5 week block, 2 or 3 weeks off, another, and then another, are you going to have one of those come to Jesus conversations with the athlete and let them know, like, you're not going to be as good for all of these? You need to pick where you want to be the best?
No, usually it's the opposite. Usually like that whole peak, which we can talk about, like peaking for an event usually can't happen a lot of times over the course of a season. So a lot of times it's building, and then maintaining for those 6 weeks. So if you're all familiar with like that performance management chart on training peaks, like ATL, TSP, CTL, usually it's build, and then during the race season, it's usually plateau / a little bit of a reduction in overall CTL, just because you're prioritizing performance and recovery to allow the athlete to dig as deep as they possibly can during those key days, which is typically Tuesdays and Thursdays for most CRL folks.
Now, Shayne, how have you seen a difference in your methods of coaching with Zwift and the ZRL races compared to like traditional outdoor racing where somebody has one big event every 6 months, where they put all of their eggs in one basket compared to racing every week for 5 weeks.
Yeah, and I come from New England, so New England, our seasons are usually 3 months long, and you might literally race every single weekend for 3 months straight. So it was interesting. The transition to Zwift wasn't that much of a shock for me, because you might do, a crit one week and then a road race the next week and then a circuit race or a time trial. So you kind of cram a full season's worth of races into 3 months time. Um, and then for like the one-off athlete, a lot of times it's not, you're just doing one race and that's it. We have a lot of times B's or C type events where for this C race, it's just a training race, but you're still going to race it. You're still going to work on your fueling, your hydration, your visualization, prepare yourself as you would for your A event. For the B events, it might be a little bit fresher, and we have a really specific focus of what we want you to work on. And then for the A race, it's obviously like you're there to set a PR, you're there to perform better than you did last year. So I still do some races with athletes and some specificity in terms of race specificity, for those athletes that just do one race per season. It just depends on what kind of athlete I'm working with. So for me, again, wasn't a big transition, but it's really important to more so feather the gas than to like floor it for the first week and then crash and burn for weeks 2 through 5 afterwards.
Right.
Yeah, so you mentioned the transition and the transforming, and when I first found Zwift, and then when you talk about the anaerobic focus of it, when I first found Zwift, I was doing a lot of outdoor, hilly not mountain biking, hilly road races in the Northeast, like the Green Mountain Stage Race and the Killington Stage Race, and racing up Mount Washington and things. And I was like so super lean, and I could do a constant pace for a really long time, a constant high pace for a really long time. When I had enough of beating myself up and being cold and wet, and became a real weather weenie, and started found the indoor racing was almost as competitive and more cohesive than racing outdoors. I was really having a rough time because I couldn't deal with the surges that happened during Zwift races. First of all, I couldn't even make it out of the pen with the group. First of all, 3 or 4 years ago, the way that the starts were, they're not like that anymore. But so what I'm trying to get at is one of the facets of my training that I really focused on was strength and resistance training. And Joy and I worked together on an article for the Zunique, based on periodization of strength training, and it started with just anatomical, adaptation, just conditioning the ligaments and the connective tissues, and spread the gamut all the way to fast twitch plyometrics. I'm wondering, where you fit that into the training for your athletes, and is that something that you would do during, getting back to the off season, like you maybe focus during that period of time as well?
Yeah, for sure. So most athletes I work with, we do about a 2-month focused block of strength work. And usually, so if we start from, say we go from the race season to the transition phase, and the transition phase is usually 2 weeks to 6 weeks in that athlete's case of pretty much no structure, just literally reconnect with yourself and your bike again. Then we move into like the general preparation phase, which is where the strength work comes in. Some athletes, I'll have them go into the gym and do like very traditional like squats, deadlifts, leg presses, those kinds of things. Some athletes can't make it to the gym, so it might be lunges with dumbbells or goblet squats or single leg deadlifts, whatever you have the ability to do. So as long as you're providing some stimulus and you're breaking down your muscle tissue to rebuild it stronger, that's kind of all that we're after with the strength phase. And then this might be a little bit counter to what other coaches would do, but I do see benefits to lower cadence work on the trainer. So Usually it's 2 weeks or so of off the bike strength work, and then 2 days a week of on the bike lower cadence work, where we're really working on applying force to the pedals. And I also might do some single leg drills, which are also like counter. Like, I hate single leg drills, they don't do anything for me, but I disagree. And it's just some other general cadence specific and pedal work, just to again kind of improve the athlete as a whole entirely. And then from there, usually it goes into the base phase and then build phase, peak phase, etc. Um, so yeah, I see some hands up.
So, well, during the build and base phase, do you continue to do any kind of strength work with your athletes?
I do. Yeah. So typically it's the heaviest in the core focus during the general preparation phase is strength training. And then as we get closer to the base phase and through the base phase, the focus becomes more so on aerobic conditioning for the athlete. So instead of the focus of 2 days a week to even 3 days a week of strength work, it might reduce to 2 days a week and then reduce down eventually to 1 day a week just for maintenance. And the goal is not to really create any soreness or like really kill yourself with the strength work. The goal is to just maintain the gains that you've made over the off season.
So, does the workouts themselves change from the standard deadlift, squat rack to like more functional, or would you still keep it the same type of workout base with the traditional squats and deadlifts?
I do a combo of functional with like general during the off season too. And then some athletes, I say most athletes, they need like a couple really individual, really specific things, especially if they have like lower back pain or tight hamstrings or whatever it might be. So a lot of times it's some general work, a little bit of functional work, and a little bit of specific work for that athlete, because everybody is obviously unique in their own needs. And then the base phase, it's still focused mostly on like traditional, so squats and deads and leg presses, things like that. Once I get to the build phase, where the focus is now purely on specificity and really getting the athlete ready to compete or to ride or whatever they happen to be doing during their season, then it reduces down to mostly functional and mostly body weight type stuff, because I don't want to have any real energy dedicated aside from the bike at that point.
I do have one more question for you, Shayne. Is how much, I'm trying to do the math, how much weight is that on your squat rack behind you?
Not enough. I usually have a couple of people on each side of my squat as I do them. So
Nice.
That's some serious weight there.
totally good.
Looks like 220.
Some big.
It looks like 225 to me.
You know those foam weights they use in movies? Those are just those behind me. They just look cool.
Right, sure it is.
So one thing I've been noticing is I do squats, deadlifts, leg press. If I'm not going twice a week, and if I go once a week, I'm sore every single time. And maybe it's just because I'm trying to continue using the same weights I usually do, somewhere around body weight for squats and a little over that on deadlifts. Is that the mistake that I'm making? And should I just be, or at least be moving another day a week? I'm kind of trying to balance that. When I go down to 1 day of weightlifting a week, then that 1 day makes me really sore.
Yeah. So I think to unpack that, when you're strengthening, you're working your muscles eccentrically as well as concentrically. So an eccentric load is when the muscles have to lengthen under tension. And most of the research states that that's when the muscles actually become torn, broke down. You get micro tearing within those muscle fibers, and that creates the soreness that you experience. The concentric load is really cycling, right? Cycling is all concentric. There's no eccentric loading. And that's when the muscles are actually having to shorten under tension. So for some athletes that have like extreme soreness, first thing I do is reduce the weight, because I don't want you to be dead for 3 days after you lift.
Mm-hmm.
If that isn't working, then I might do some modifications and just focus on concentric movements. So you might do a squat from a seated position, and you're just focused on going from sitting to standing. So you're just getting that concentric load. And then a lot of times once a week, I've noticed the same thing, just anecdotally. I don't have any research to back this up. I haven't seen a lot of benefits from strength training as far as increasing weight at once a week. Twice a
Okay.
week tends to be the sweet spot where like best bang for your buck. And 3 times a week is great if you can kind of squeeze it in. But twice a week for me seems to be the sweet spot for athletes of doing enough weight, having some soreness, but not like crazy soreness, and then seeing consistent and steady progress in their overall volume each week.
Now, I have a popular question that I know a lot of people debate is weights before cycling or cycling before weights?
I typically don't combine the two. Usually I'll do a warm up or something, but then let's conserve your energy for what the focus is that day. So if the focus is strength training, then you should be warmed up but fresh for the weights. And the vice versa. If the focus is cycling, then you should be fresh for the bike. I've seen very few athletes do that successfully. And that's also where like the focuses, which I mentioned before, the focuses each phase are purposely so the focus during like the prep phase is strength work, not so much on cycling, versus the focus on base build phases are less so on strengthening and more so on cycling. Um, yeah, the what that is called is escaping me at the moment, but there is some research around that. Like, what's that called? Chris might know.
Interference. I know
No.
I have heard of an interference effect where if you're trying to do the aerobic and strength work too close to each other, they can interfere with each other, or you're not going to get the same bang for the buck. So, like, just because of my schedule on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I would usually ride and strength train, but I would do one before work and one after. So there's a good
Mm-hmm.
10-hour gap between the two.
Mm-hmm.
Give me a second, gentlemen. I am looking it up because the interference effect. That's exactly what it's called. Robert Hickson, scientist at the University of Illinois in the 1970s, is the one who coined that term. I wrote an article about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's since kind of been debunked, but it's very much a debate because if you had to, like, the way that I kind of structured it in my article was that if you have no choice, you have to do them both on the same day, then which would you choose? Like, obviously you want to, if everything was ideal, you would do weights on one day, you do your heavy riding, intense riding on another. But if you are time crunched, which a lot of people are, especially that are in the situations that we're in, we have families, businesses, whatever. Sometimes you have the one day and you got to put them both in there. So the consensus that, with the research that I found was that whichever one you think is more important, that's the one that you do first, because you're
Mm-hmm.
obviously going to have more. There's no real scientific. There are studies that show, if you do this, then you'll have a better workout strength wise, or but it's contradictory in a lot of ways. But yeah, that's what's called the interference effect. Very interesting. So anyway, you said that tangents were okay, and
Yeah.
when when I knew that we were going to have you on, I was thinking to myself, what question would I want to ask Shayne if I had the ability to ask him? So let's go back to the ZRL. So yesterday we had a ZRL race, and it was pretty intense. 6 laps of that Two Bridges loop. And did you race, Ken? You probably didn't because you weren't feeling well.
Nope.
All right, so basically it was, we're talking about the the IF and the everything else. It was basically 13 anaerobic efforts over the course of an hour.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm just looking at my stats now. I averaged 225 and I'm 67 kilos. My normalized power was 300. It was crazy. My IF was 1.14 for the race.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm trying to get at is the question that I want to ask you is, and this is a total tangent, and you can say, Chris, you're out of your mind. I'm not going to answer that question, but should I be eating during this?
No.
Now I do a half hour, fairly, somewhat, intense warm up ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
Are you eating breakfast?
Yeah, I eat a pretty hefty breakfast. but I do get up to so for the it's I'm a crazy man. The race for me was 5:30 Eastern time. I was up at 3 a.m. getting something in my body so that I would be able to pedal the bicycle at 5:30.
Yeah. So no, I typically know 90 minutes tends to be that point at which you want to start to eat for me in most cases and athletes I work with. But you should have enough glycogen on board in your liver, in your muscles to last about 90 minutes at least. So even if it's really, really intense, you shouldn't find much an issue with it. But it's a good experiment where if you felt like you were getting lightheaded or you just felt like those pretty common low blood sugar symptoms, you might want to have an extra serving of carbohydrate for dinner or get up at 3 a.m. and have an actual carbohydrate rich meal before the race itself.
Yeah, that I certainly do. But I need the 2 hours to metabolize it and
Yeah.
to be ready. Yeah, the reason why I bring it up is because I interview these Premier League guys and some of the elite guys, and a lot of them are pounding the gel for every 20 minutes that they're on the bike.
What about even just like liquid? Not even like food or gel so much as like with liquid, you can scoop out a certain amount of calories. So it may not even need to be much. It's just a little bit to where you can take a few sips. That's going to hit your system a lot quicker when you're drinking it. And with the studies that have shown with just having it's like you can just have the sugar hits your tongue and it affects your brain, and so something like that to where you don't have to actually eat, but you could just have a sip of something.
Yeah. Victor Campenerz did that for the hour record. It's an interesting video of him. He didn't actually take anything. He just would swig it in his mouth and then spit it out.
Right.
But
And it's supposed, I mean, I think these are some newer studies that show just having sugar in your mouth affects your brain and, stimulates you to increase your power or pace, whatever it may be. For runners, they do it too to prevent the GI distress of consuming the carbs or whatever it may be, but still gives you the energy.
Mm-hmm. So were these Premier guys, I'm going to go back to that. Were these Premier guys doing it every 20 minutes during like a 3-hour race? Or for like a 40-minute thing?
The Zwift Grand Prix isn't 3 hours. They're not doing those long scratch races anymore. Now it's just a series of. Well, but I'm telling you, I shouldn't have to tell. You know more than I do. But now it's just basically a series of mini races for the most part. They're 20-minute to a half-hour races, but they are extended over a period of time. But even the scratch races, from the times I've spoken to them, they're eating something fairly frequently.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be curious. Once we start to see more of those like Super Sapiens type things come into play, and once we get to see some more normalized data, I'd be curious to see if we all are eating enough, eating enough, too little. What am I trying to say? Like, what is the optimal range of your blood sugar to be in during that type of competition and that type of event?
And
I had some athletes that have Super Sapiens, but go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, no. Tell us what Super Sapiens, Shayne?
Super Sapiens is a blood glucose monitor that you attach to.
We did the podcast with Pete Butler.
Got it. I didn't
was here,
remember the name brand. Yeah.
Yeah. But they all work on Freestyle Libre, I think, is the sensor, which is a pretty common diabetic sensor. So it's taking the same sensor, but applying it to a different audience, which is obviously athletes.
Got it.
But yeah, that's like the next, I think that's one of the next big things, quote unquote, is like blood sugar modulation and blood sugar monitoring 24/7 and seeing.
I think so too, because so many people get that wrong.
Yeah.
Just in general,
It's hard to do unless you have the data to validate and support it. It's all just being based on feel. Like I feel like this is the right amount of food, or I feel like I'm performing well, which is obviously important, but the data validation is going to be interesting to see once we start to see some stuff come out. Problem with Super Sapiens is you can't get them stateside yet.
No.
They're only available in Europe. I think it's an FDA issue or something. I don't know.
Yeah, Pete Butler knows the owner and was able to test it. And so we did a podcast with him, and it was pretty fascinating, all the data that he had.
Yeah. Really, really cool.
What alcohol does.
Yeah, well, you can wear some kind of HRV strap to see what alcohol does and get data pretty much immediately. At least for me, it destroys my sleep when I drink alcohol.
Yeah, that's what I commonly hear. I was actually listening to a Whoop podcast the other day, and they were talking deep diving on sleep, and alcohol is one of the number one offenders for causing bad
Totally,
sleep.
totally.
Yep.
Yeah, for me, it was alcohol was the number one detractor, and temperature was my number one uh, benefactor. What's the
Hmm.
opposite of detractor? Attractor?
Promoter.
Promoter? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I know, like, so anyway, if you work for a SaaS company, they send out net promoter score, and you're either
Okay, so it might be
promoter and
NPS.
detractor are
My
the
NPS score is always going to increase when I have a low, a cool temperature when I sleep in. And I always get terrible when I drink alcohol.
Nice, very good. Well, any other untouched topics on this? What I'm getting is the title, "Death of the Off Season," is there. That is not something that we should strive for. We should strive for having some sort of off season, like even if it's sort of this time of the year, like once in the spring, once in the fall, between your ZRL seasons, take a little break. And I think Chris
Yeah.
has something he wants to add to.
Go ahead, Chris.
Well, I just, the reason why, I brought the cast together to create the Virtual Velo Podcast was because of the Dirt Dad Fund. It's a charitable organization. I wanted to raise awareness, and not everybody knows that you have a cause that's really near and dear to your heart, also, Shayne. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about it, and whatever we can do to raise awareness and get the word out there.
Yeah. Let me close because that's going to be a huge transition. Yeah, so I think the off season is it's a great title because you're going to get a lot of clicks for sure if you post it.
Good.
So marketing
Not
is
above that.
101. That's great.
Yeah, we're trying to
then-
beat that other Never Going Pro podcast.
Yeah, those guys are a bunch of jabronis,
Yeah.
so you don't have much time. There won't be much of a challenge for you to do that. Don't worry. I know all those guys. But yeah, I think the off season is really just it's important, and I think general introspection, I guess that's a good word to say, general introspection and like listening to your body, listening to your mind, and then really taking care of me, myself, and I think that's really, really important. And that's going to lead to more compliance, stronger workouts, and ideally longer longevity in the sport if you're able to take care of yourself and not just pummel yourself into the ground, because you have to do a zero race number 6 where you just mentally burnt out from doing it. So yeah, I think there is benefits to the off season.
Nice.
Yeah, and the big transition here is, yeah, so my daughter Grace was born with this thing called CMV, or cytomegalovirus. It's actually congenital cytomegalovirus, and congenital means that she was born with it and it was passed from her mom to her in the womb. And CMV is really, really common. About 80% of kids have it before they're the age of 4. And most kids that have it after birth, it's just a cold, nothing really crazy. However, for congenital kids, it leads to a lot of neurological issues because it essentially attacks the developing brain and the developing fetus. So for Grace, unfortunately for her, she got it really early in her development. She was born profoundly deaf. She has some issues with her vision, cerebral palsy, and seizures, and a G tube for food. She has unfortunately, a lot of issues, and she's pretty severely disabled as a result of it. So what I've been doing is trying to raise awareness for CMV. So hopefully this podcast will help me do that. And then also try to pass legislation in Massachusetts to get CMV on the universal screening list for newborns, because most newborns are born with CMV. They aren't like Grace. Grace is pretty rare case, fortunately for other kids. But most kids that are born with CMV, they pass all their hearing exams at birth, but then we don't know they have CMV, and they gradually lose their hearing. So by the time they're 2 or 3, they could be profoundly deaf as a result of CMV activity. And if you don't screen kids for CMV in the first 21 days of life, you can't know if it's congenital. so you can't actually do any treatment for it, which are some kind of antiviral treatment, which actually has been shown to maintain and preserve hearing for the long term. So that's the main benefit of that bill, is we're trying to get universal screening for kids in Massachusetts, as well as prenatal education, because an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, as they say. And prevention techniques are really simple. It's basically every other virus on Earth. So like try not to uh, uh, exchange fluids with newborns or with toddlers. Like don't kiss a baby on the mouth. Don't share food with your kids. If you get pee in your hands after changing a diaper, wash your hands before you touch your infant or before you touch a pregnant woman. It's just kind of basic techniques and stuff to control. But nobody is talking about CMV prenatally, and nobody is being educated about CMV in their prenatal appointments. So I'm trying to change that as well in Massachusetts. Yeah,
Nice.
that's my spiel.
Fantastic. That's
Great.
Good stuff. Yep. And Chris, do you have a Dad Fund update?
No, I just I think last podcast I just told everybody to get their orders in, and I'm just hoping now that the orders get out to everybody in time. Just keep your fingers crossed. But anyway, no, it's the dirt community is always extremely generous and gives us the opportunity to help people. We've had some members that have had children that have special needs and they need things, and we've been able to help them. And it's kind of like a full circle thing, like Shayne had mentioned. So yeah, it's that's what it's all about.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
Yep. Well, it's been a pleasure meeting with all three of you again, and happy Thanksgiving. To our audience, thank you for joining the Virtual Velo Podcast, and we will be back again soon with another interesting topic. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Bye all.